Well, it was fairy tales that my father told me at night when I went to bed. It was like bedtime stories, and it was kind of the bribe to get me to go to bed. And he would, I would get in bed. He'd sit on the edge of the bed or take a chair beside the bed, sit there, and he didn't read them. He recited them. He knew the fairy tales, right? And he would, and I, of course, thought he was making it up. I didn't know that these were stories that other people knew. So, it would be, I remember Hansel and Gretel was one of my favorites, and Goldilocks and so et cetera, telling those stories. And it would be, I loved them. And he could tell them over and over again. I didn't care. In fact, in fact, I remember saying, Dad, you skipped a part. You skipped that part. Oh, okay. Yeah. And that would it, and he would leave me there, give me a kiss on the forehead or something when he was done, put out the light, and then I would go off into dreamland in that same world, kind of
Hmm.
like going off into that. So it was that was my first, and I would gay when he'd say go to bed, I'd say, tell me a story. Tell me a story. Okay. And he always did. Uh, and so then I got into stories, right? And I know you mentioned Montreal. My family is uh, my mother's family from Quebec, from what they call the Eastern Townships, L'Ange
Hmm.
Gardien down that way. And so they used to come down. My grandfather was one of 19 children, and they had a farm up in near Bedford, Quebec. And they would all come, not all, bunch of them would come down in the winter because there's nothing to do on the farm, right? In the winter. So they would come down and come to Lowell or Holyoke. Um, Not so much was Fall River and work in the factories. So it was like seasonal work. They'd come down, and I've looked up in Ancestry. You could find the railroad, the crossing the border, and they'd have the names of which kids she took. My grandmother took down, and all of that. So they came down and worked that, and that family was. Eventually, they would all end up staying down here. We had big contingent in Lowell, smaller contingent in Holyoke, big contingent in Worcester, some Fall River people. We all connected. If there was a wedding somewhere, you'd go to Lowell, or they'd come to Worcester, and and they were great storytellers. They talked all the time. Now, a lot of times they were talking in French at my grandmother's table. Um, but like my mother grew up speaking French. There was a French school in the neighborhood right across from. I went to the Irish school where my father had gone, also French, but he went to the Irish school. But right across the street, and they only spoke French in school. They would at my mother's time. When I was going, they did half a day in French and half in English, and we were, we would make fun of each other. French, what we call them, the frogs or something like French frogs. And of course, I was one, and they would call us English muffins or something like that. I don't know what it was. So there was this little rivalry. And so uh, they didn't let us, my family didn't let us little kids speak French. They said, "You're Americans. You speak English. You're not French," like that. So they would be, and they when they didn't want us to know what they were talking about, they slipped into French. And okay, yeah. And so my grandfather would say "fermez la bouche," which means shut your mouth. That was one of the things I learned. But they was at my grandmother's house when, well, most of my childhood. We met at my grandmother's house every Sunday for what we call dinner in Massachusetts. The evening meal is supper. The middle meal on Sunday, if it's big, it's lunch during the week, but it's dinner on Sunday. So we would go there for dinner. She made the same thing every Sunday, my grandmother. All of her kids, she had six kids, and they all came with their kids. And we had four. My one aunt had six. Like, so there was a big family. They're all in there, and the kids got to sit at the kids' table in another room or something like that. Um, and when the meal was over, the men would get up and walk into the den to watch the Red Sox lose to the Yankees. And the women stayed in the kitchen and told and gossiped about the neighborhood. I stayed in the kitchen because I loved those stories. They were talking about there were people you saw at mass, earlier or something like that, or people you knew. So I just listened to them, and my job was they all smoked Pall Malls and drank instant coffee with evaporated milk, carnation evaporated milk, took that. So my job was to empty the ashtrays, fill the cups up, and then I sat off to the side. And when they wanted me not to, they would spell things or something if they didn't want me to know what it was. So PG, they would say she's PG. Well, it took me 1 minute to figure that one out. It was like, oh, she is. Oh, okay. I didn't know how that happened at the time, but um, and so it was like, so I would just listen to the trouble in the neighborhood. He did this, he's leaving her, he's in a, all of that sort of thing. It was great. It was just like all about troubles, telling stories and how to tell them. So that's where I got my first not graduate school, but undergraduate fiction writing class. Gossip.